Hi.
Just getting our bearings. So, Alex and I are going to share this 1 hour, and we're both going to be reading from our ongoing projects, kind of work in progress, sharing, figuring out how things resonate. It turns out we have kind of similar ways of working, but we're also kind of sharing texts that are using different techniques, but we have the same kinds of maybe like drives in the way that we work. So maybe we get into that very briefly, and then Alex will read her text.
Yeah. I mean, I'm basically gonna read my text that is not my text, which I discovered, and I actually discovered through a reading of another person. And I thought this is very fitting for a radio show to basically read a remix of quotes of Dennis Cooper, as I've recently finished reading the George Miles cycle, which is just as fever-inducing as the heat right now. And the selection of quotes I've been collecting had a lot to do with writing and the sort of like meta vision of writing and what writing does and what fiction does and how writing is sort of connected to obsession, specifically because the whole George Miles cycle is about obsession. And it's basically this collage on text about writing and the inability to write, or the frustrations that come along with writing, and collaged with a sort of ghostly description of all Dennis Cooper's and accidentally also my obsessions with gawky looking brown haired teenage boys, I guess. Yeah.
Do you want to get into it?
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna start.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm home playing some records and writing a script about tea. The sources, as much as the words, would tell you something of a story of my thoughts, reflections, and preoccupations. Even if my personal thoughts are not at all that interesting to anyone, whoever reads these quotations will bring their own meaning and interpretation to those words. Alex, 28, is an insecure, self-involved writer, borderline alcoholic, with a blandly witty manner, passable literary talents, and this humongous intellect that he exercises only on occasion. I've been trying to write a script, which is a semi-requirement and a good chance to focus on my thoughts, which are weak in the storyline area. I have this fascination with tea and all its proxies, sex and violence, literally, abstractly, formally, whatever, that I'm somehow trying to transport into the present, but the way in which gay culture eliminates ambiguity really doesn't do anything for me. I'm juggling a lot of ideas. Script for a porn scenario, a B-movie, a rock opera. I might use this for something later though. Epistolary novel, confessional. But then there's this whole confessional culture that's growing up now, etc., etc. T is a little paranoid and perpetually on. He has chocolately shoulder-length hair, a thin face, big, wild eyes, and a tall, narrow body disguised by loose clothes. He's overeducated, spaced out, and extremely neurotic. This all needs a center, a theory, a sense of belief. I believe in the power of writing to sanitize the unthinkable, but such a chowder must seem to reflect one clear viewpoint, and I feel so divided, as though myself and my self-understanding were merely atop one another with no sense of how they might coalesce, much less attract or engage with an audience. This needs intense thought. Alex is this kind of intellectual, cerebral writer who lives in his own head and is quite predatory in an exploratory way. We've never spoken. In my fantasy, we're at a used CD store where he works and our eyes accidentally meet. There's a flash of recognition. It could be emotional, spiritual, sexual, whatever. The details don't matter. T is a quote at best, not a character. Knowing Alex is hot for him is semi-interesting. Unlike me, he can write fiction because he basically just writes himself. Anyway, as a way to help him overcome his obsessive wish, I've instigated this project, a kind of pseudo-essay script, whatever. I'm thinking it might be a safe, effective way for him and me to semi-act our intermeshed fantasies once and for all. T is like a doppelganger. Alex gets him out there to put his obsessions into him, which is a lot of power for a quote. In my fantasy, this wish would be the plot of a script. My logic is maybe if this fantasy could be enacted in writing, he'd have it to study. And on a purely selfish level, I'd be halfway to literalizing a dream. Alex's writing utilizes a structured style to deconstruct his psychological makeup. It's mildly entertaining, over intellectualized, and slightly obscure, just like him. The main character, a waifish androgyne with hippie talks and nervous mannerisms, is modeled on T. In the script, T is enacting his wish. It's supposed to represent Alex's projections or whatever. And the whole piece is really about Alex's subconscious desires, so it's a little incoherent. When I need to write and the image of T feels too volatile, I turn to this small clique of fantasy figures, this mental harem of cute understudies whose membership changes from occasion to occasion like an ill-starred rock band's. Alex's favorite characters were slim, pale teenagers with shoulder-length hair, preferably brown, dated haircuts, and oversized eyes. I spend half of my life in my head, spaced out, imagining impossibilities. When I'm not lost in daydreams, I'm just sort of clumsily negotiating whatever the world puts in front of me. Skinny, pale, gawky, turned up nose, long brown hair. I wish the real me and the secretive me were united. I wish I could speak in one adequate, coherent voice and make sense. Or should I say, if I were a good writer, that's what I'd wish for. Sweet, deep, a little paranoid, and perpetually on. Chocolately long shoulder-length hair, a thin face, big, wild eyes, and a tall, narrow body disguised by loose clothes, overeducated, spaced out, and extremely neurotic. But divided in two as I am, everything subject to compromise. The only wish that both parts of my psyche have ever agreed on is this slitty brown eyes, big lips, and the tip of the nose turned up, brown hair, shoulder length, slender, bony, and his skin the color of steamed glass. Once, maybe twice, Alex has talked about what types of guys he finds attractive. You know, tall, thin, pale, dark eyes, big eyes. He seemed oblivious to the resemblance, but he must know. You know, I write scripts that aren't essentially long, involving wishes for an offbeat utopian world that I can't realistically enter. Still, half absorbed as he is, he must find his extreme adoration of tea at least vaguely suspicious. This is just a quick note to say that while T is beautiful and everything, he's slightly disappointing in person, like everyone always is when you know them from reproduction, and Alex is suddenly struck by the problem of how to get what he wants out of him, whatever it is. Alex is flashing in and out of what we call reality. There is no point in describing his mental locales. Just accept that he's in two very vast, complicated, non-narrative states. To him, a particular sort of male something is everything. It doesn't exist in the world, but certain characters come reasonably close to whatever it is. Hence, his writing, which collages together scraps in painstakingly casual Frankensteinish constellations. It's instinctive stuff. I can explain it in theoretical terms, but it's completely obsessive. Luckily, obsessive gay art is still trendy at the moment. He's building imaginary lovers, friends, sons, younger brothers, slaves, gods. It's a vaguely creepy thing. It's weird to get lost into something so calculatedly chaotic. It's retro, pre-punk, bourgeois, meaningless, etc. If I were articulate and not just neurotic, I'd write an essay about it. To me, his work's obvious. It bores me. I think he's obsessed with reproduction, recapitulating everything so automatically. Anyway, the point is, I'm writing about a character I imagine myself to be. That's a guy who'll relate to the strange situation I'm in. Mainly, I'm going to write some things because I'll flip if I don't. In this script, I'm half here, half in there. So, hoping to stay in that half-aware state, I pulled out a notebook and pen and began to take notes on my surroundings, occasionally adding a cryptic bit of analysis. Not that anything brilliant showed up on the page. I just sit here, scribbling, jerking off. That's what my left hand is doing while this one is writing. Alex is at home, typing a draft of the previous chapter. Several minutes ago, he pushed play on his boombox.
So for the last 3 or so months, I've been beginning to put together what I first thought would be a novel, kind of out of the ignorance of like not really knowing much about fiction and not really being a literary person. I've been describing it as a novel without really understanding that it doesn't really fit at all my way of working and the kind of underlying, I guess, neurosis that's driving this writing process. The novel, or the project for now, is called Glory. And the kind of premise is that today a lot of us are kind of plagued by ambient paranoia that is on one hand real, but also of course leads to kind of a delusional self-perpetuation of the things that make us paranoid. The idea is that today anyone is able to like compromise somebody else by having smart devices on us. So the question was kind of like, in a speculative way, like what would a spy actually act like today? How would one even find out that someone is spying? Is it even like necessary to, like, what is the figure of the spy today given this kind of interconnectedness and living in a surveillance state? And then it's coupled with the kind of potentially hostile and at the same time disarming situation of like falling in love and also falling in love across difference, which is always something that can, which is potentially something that can activate that whole complex. So it all began with writing a bunch of different fragments, which is where this kind of obsessional drive in the writing process definitely is mirrored in both of our like processes. Like I was kind of just like gathering a lot of fragments of my own, kind of trying to like excavate in a way almost, like also from that subconscious, but also working with found text. And so today I'm going to read you some of those like automatic fragments that kind of sit as the drive behind the fiction, and then also some of the more like constructed fiction, just because as I found in this process, it's a very, very humbling experience to write fiction for the first time and have to actually like separate myself from something that I feel so like entangled with. So this is the first fragment, and I guess we'll see how many I'll be able to read in the time. Notebook entry. The last 2 weeks have been some of the longest in my life. I've been watching and monitoring the reality TV show of global suppression versus human resistance unfold on my many screens. I always keep one on me, at least one. The epic narratives of good and bad sides no longer hold when subjects have disintegrated into swarms of data points that in life fluctuate and drift fluidly, yet stand in constant tension and opposition to their digital twin, which is rigid, structured, directionally oriented towards the fulfillment of pre-existing paths. My flesh is dull and aching because it feels the antagonism between the stone-chiseled path that is meant to walk and the florets of small currents it hopes to send out like pheromones, to scent out the way without obstruction. Fuck this dynamic maze that keeps rebuilding. Stop locating me outside of myself. Stop forcing me to identify with my twin, that stony serpent face I see in the mirror. I live in an infinite now because it was constructed to be that way. The future seems to be enclosed upon, but my body remains one made of water, evaporating its sweat and drawn to other bodies of water, like two droplets falling close to one another and merging into one. How many of you exist, twin? How many mirrors? How many windows are waiting to encroach on my body at any moment? I'm a swarm of these tiny moments that won't let my body be whole. No matter how hard I try, My boundaries and surfaces will never be as solid as theirs because I leak all the time, which propels the whole thing further. My vapor fuels the steam engine that I can't help but leak into. I don't mean to romanticize digital noise and to elevate trash to gold just because it was refused, and so I need to project onto it. The digital detritus was never mine to begin with. To identify with it feels like a misguided nostalgia. It tricks me into the fake experience of love. When I love this detritus, it seems loving a corpse. So I would say fuck the romanticized glitch in the machine. I already am the glitch that optimizes it by introducing volatility. And so the software lives and crawls in my wetware, scrambling my code, draining my brain from its resources that want to merge with others. I become more and more limited in my movement, living in pods, moving from one to the other in a closed tunnel system of rooms, streets, platforms, and subcontractors. The body gets passed around seamlessly by the invisible hand, and I keep looking to be caressed by it. Do we relate to the invisible hand in the same way, dear twin? Or are you really one of its trillion digits? I've been watching a place I've never been from a distance, out of love. Love supposedly breeds solidarity, and I refuse to give it everywhere because solidarity must be lived if it is not to perpetuate the kind of violence that robs victims of their last dignity. There is a country in me, molecularly, a love bug. The country in me is implicated and human. The country in me feels the ache of being fixed by international discourse while its voice is culled. The country in me watches the world encroach and build on my pathways, speculate about my fate in increasingly divergent funnels. The country in me has already lost its voice and been played 100 times over. I start to mirror this sensation, monitoring everything, becoming increasingly tense, tired, sleeping less. After one too many messages, I write something into my own feed to try to express solidarity without making it about myself. But solidarity will always be about myself, about the creation of or the will for something solid. These 2 weeks have been long in a way I've not felt before. I'm going to skip some parts. I'll never forget the day when I attended a Zoom seminar with a performance artist who got us to do a collective somatic dance exercise. It was the middle of lockdown. The way the buffer and glitches on the screen, the recordings of bodies broadcast into my home environment trying to communicate me just absolutely failed. To communicate with the body in dance via these new digital organs felt improper. There was all this external black hole presence that was watching and encroaching, learning from what we were doing. How could any of this have been intimate in the way it was intended? My first Zoom ever was an interview. I couldn't see who I was presenting to. More often than not, I get the sense that neutrality is no longer an option for me. The mask I hid behind my whole life no longer works its charms. My identity exists in thousands of data points, my future speculated against, hedged against. If I want to become a more lucrative asset, mobility is key. Don't let them expect your next move. That's the motive that plays into higher and more aggressive forms of capture. My pathway is diffuse and vaporous. I shall seek to become an aura. Watch me become perfume, disintegrate into the higher faculties of air and particles, where movement can no longer be restricted, where the only register available is that of intuition. You need to send me out if you want to find me. You need to be whole. A writer I follow on the platform posted recently, the inherent transience of visual culture and the iconicity of femininity as spectacle go hand in hand. The text was overlaid on a short clip of a man caressing with a pretty intense amount of pressure the plastic silicone face of a highly accurate female robot. Femininity has become a cathedral to those seeking to exert control by means of models. A friend writes to me on the platform. He says, "It's like a human brain against a digital black hole." He says, "But if it wasn't for this black hole, well, I don't know." He says, "I don't want to give the platform credit for facilitating partial solutions to the absolute problem it represents." I tell him I'll try to cut my screen time a bit. He says he will too. I send him 2 small fairy emojis. He says, "Our brain cells together against this shit." He says, "I do feel like a lot of the precious things each of us values has been found precisely in resistance to the black hole." I say, "I'm interested in gaming it and creating opportunities to make time." He says, 2026 goals. He has to go and buy vegetables before the shops close. I tell him to take care. He says, "You too." So this was like kind of the type of dump that I would like work from, that I kind of gather like this. And now it's been kind of about trying to like painstakingly like actually put this kind of a neurosis into a world of images that kind of makes sense to somebody who isn't me, which has been humbling. So here's a part of the actual fiction. Or, I mean, might not end up being, but I'm trying. So, the studio at 2 a.m. The acid bites at exactly the depth you allow it. This is what Nadia loves about etching, the way the process has opinions. She held the copper plate in the ferric chloride solution for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, counted in her head because her phone was in her bag, and looking at her phone meant looking at her phone. She was working with merchant category codes. Her own. 2 weeks of transactions compiled from her bank's export function, the numbers that described her life more accurately than she could. 5411 for the supermarket, 5812 for the cafe she went to too often, 7372 twice for software she couldn't identify. The numbers arranged themselves across the copper plate in a grid, a portrait that bore no resemblance to her face. The studio was the kind of empty that has a smell. Someone's sandwich on the windowsill going off. She'd swiped her student card to enter, which logged her arrival. There was a camera near the door. She'd noted its angle on her first day and had noted herself noting it. Her phone in her bag was talking to towers, giving her coordinates to something. 3 towers or more. She didn't know exactly. The thing about surveillance is that you don't feel seen. You feel nothing. The data leaves you before it becomes about you. She lifted the plate from the bath and rinsed it and pressed a square of paper to its surface and ran the press. When she pulled the print, she found in the upper left corner a cluster of codes she didn't remember etching. She looked at them for a long time. 7011, 5541, 4111. Hotel, gas station, public transit. She hadn't been to a hotel. She didn't have a car. She went back to her bank records on her laptop and found nothing that corresponded. She set the print aside. She started a new plate. Later at home, she opened a note on her phone titled "The Coincidences" and added 7011, 5541, 4111 in upper left corner of the plate, origin unknown. It was the 3rd entry. Here's another automatic fragment that switches between German and English, so sorry. Die Nagelfeile für feste Nägel, für Kunstnägel. Meine sind weich wie Butter, splinterhaft, geschichtet. Like one of those razor shells that satisfyingly splinters off. Oder wie Schieferstein. Du schichtest dich selbst. It feels like the outer shell of keratin keeps trying to expose me and develop into the next before I can continue to scratch. Biting, however, that I can do. 2026, my year of calcium and biting it. To tear apart and let the liquid trickle down in drops and strings. I'm going feral, the cannibal in me says. Let's not show off the armor anymore. Let's feel the pulsing flesh, the rhythm of full, heavy, slosh and slush. I'll go to Berghain when my head is so full that I'm prepared to draw blood. When are those building infrastructure actually going to turn to the people and their needs? I know you capable ones are out there, and I keep wondering what you're quietly chasing instead. Who's sitting in a compound somewhere far out in the hills, hoping to put heads together to gather energy and strength before the true battle is to be fought? I retreat further into nothing, and nevertheless, kind souls seem to keep watching. Ina reaches out to me. Have you tried martial arts yet? How does she read my mind like that? To fight amongst other women, to know the ancient craft of self-defense, I mean, I guess this or the other ancient craft, self-discipline. This is the swear I cling to and search. The year of the fire horse is the year when I bite, the year that I fight with my body, the year of sauna and dance, year of heat. According to traditional Chinese medicine, my body is cold, and I do feel that every day. I'll go on holiday to Italy. Okay, now here is another fiction scene. The opening. The gallery was in the 4th district, in a building that had been a printing house. Before that, something the architecture didn't want to say. The floors were original, which meant they were loud, which meant every arrival was announced to everybody already there. The artist whose opening it was had made paintings about her body's betrayals. Large canvases, muted pinks and grays, text embedded at the surface like something trying to get out. The paintings were very good. They were also exactly the shape the institution required. Confessional, embodied, personal as political. The artist's suffering was legible to the room in a way that some suffering is and other suffering isn't. Nadia did not mean this uncharitably. Legibility was a skill. She was still learning which kinds she had. The gallery director gave a speech. He said, brave and necessary conversation and this moment, and the artist's name twice. The artist stood slightly straighter. Nadia watched this from the back, the particular dignity of having your wound validated by a room of people who would go home afterward and did not look away from it because she thought you shouldn't. There was a woman near the door to the 2nd room, which was closed and which no one went into. She was holding a drink and not drinking it. She was watching who spoke to whom. Nadia noticed her noticing, and the woman did not look away. Nadia looked away first, which felt like losing something, though she couldn't have said what. The small one in the corner, said someone behind her. The only one I'd live with. She turned. A man, early 30s, slightly too tall for the room. He was holding his glass at a diagonal that suggested many previous openings attended with varying degrees of sincerity. Why that one? She asked. The others demand something of you. That one is just there. She looked at the small canvas. A grey rectangle. A word at its center she couldn't read at this distance. His name was Leo. He worked for something called the Institute for Digital Resilience. Research on how influence operations targeted diaspora communities in Western Europe. He said diaspora communities with the fluency of someone who'd stopped hearing the phrase. I saw your work in the advanced catalogue, he said. The show isn't for 3 weeks. Someone sent me the PDF. She looked at him. What do you think? I thought you were precise, he said, about data that most people treat as background noise. It's not background, she said. No, he said, it isn't. He had known her name before she gave it. She had been looked up before. She had learned to note it without reacting to it. The question was what kind of interest this was, and she didn't have enough information yet to type it. When she went to get more wine, she looked back towards the second room. The woman near the closed door was gone. The door was still closed. Now here we have another automatic fragment. I basically have this habit of when I don't know how to start writing, or also when I feel I want to write something more personal, I have this like figure that I write to. She's a real person, but I never met her. Unfortunately, she's already passed away, but it's actually Gloria Anyaldua, who's like who was a writer. And I don't know, I just got like very attached to her writing, so now I kind of write to her. So yeah, this is one of those. Dear Gloria, I can't count on my fingers how many letters and attempts at letters that trail off into the abysses of my brain cavity and all the thinking cells of my body. How many of these I've already addressed to you? Or is it really rather at you? For it's not like I can actually direct them to you in any meaningful way. You're not here to receive them. But I try to conjure you every time that I do, since V introduced us to your writings and therefore in some way to you. Perhaps this time it's up to me to actually address you, to attempt a conversation. I know that to speak with your words and images is impossible. It's been quite a handy and generative technique that makes me feel less alone. I've been keeping it in my back pocket, and you in my back pocket, since the writing retreat I did last spring in the castle. Gloria, I'll never forget the poem that you wrote about the student that handed in her assignment late. Do you think you wrote it out of interest in her life, the reasons she might have been unable or unwilling to deliver it to you? I've wondered many times before, when I disappear, which I'm prone to do before any kind of assignment, does the recipient ever think about me or the reasons for my disappearance? Another scene in his apartment. The apartment was near the market, on a street where the buildings were funeral. Sometimes autocorrect, I guess, has its own hallucinations. Where the buildings were funeral, I mean, we are in Vienna, and beautiful, and had been renovated inside by someone with precise opinions about exposed concrete. He had a good coffee grinder, one shelf of books in 3 languages, a succulent he'd been meaning to repot for the entire time she'd known him, which had sent out a new shoot since she was last here, a small pale green fact. They ate and they were on the couch with the light low, and she was a little drunk, which was a state she monitored in herself because it made her want to give things away. She started to tell him about the new piece, the merchant category code work that he knew. The next one was different source material, sensitive, a document that described the architecture of a system, a domestic system in a country she wasn't going to name, a document that had reached her the way documents travel now, not in envelopes, not through dead drops, but through encrypted channels in three hops, each person knowing only the node adjacent to them. She had it encrypted on her drive. She was thinking about what to do with it. She was about to tell him the shape of what it contained, and she stopped. She stopped in the middle of a sentence. He was watching her with attention, hands still. His phone was face down on the coffee table. Nothing about the scene was wrong. The problem was that the scene being not wrong was not evidence of anything. What? he said. I lost the thought. You were talking about source material? I'll tell you when it's further along. He accepted this. He did not push. She noted that he didn't push. She noted that she had noted it. This was the recursive problem of the compromised instrument. A measuring tool that has been interfered with cannot measure its own error. She trusted him. She made a decision to trust him, which was as close to trust as she could currently get. Not the dissolution of doubt, but the decision to proceed as though the doubt were a manageable variable. She knew it was not the same thing. Trust proper was what you did when you stopped calculating. She had not stopped calculating. She was not sure. She remembered how. His laptop was on the table, half open. While she was in the bathroom, a notification had appeared on the screen. When she came back, it was closed. She didn't say anything. It was probably nothing. It was the kind of thing that was probably nothing in the way she could no longer fully inhabit. He put his arm around her, and she put her head on his shoulder, and outside the city was doing what the city does, which was persist, which was go on being itself in its beautiful, wrong way. Its streets full of monuments to things that had already ended. Its winters full of light from windows in which people were doing the private things people do in windows when they think no one's watching, which is a thing she had stopped being able to assume. She thought about the coincidences, the unknown codes in the copper plate, the app she could not remember installing. A week ago, a message from a number she didn't recognize that referenced a file by the internal name she used for it on her laptop, a name she had invented, a compound word, not a phrase that would occur naturally, not something you'd arrive at twice by accident. She had stared at the message for a long time. There were explanations. The word was a word. She had not added it to the list yet. She was waiting to see if she could talk herself out of it, and she was running out of time before she had to admit she couldn't. Are you okay? He said. Tired. He didn't ask again which she loved, and noted that she loved it, and noted that a careful person would know exactly when not to ask. She stayed. She had decided to stay. It was either intimacy or exposure. From the inside, they were distinguishable now, and she was doing it anyway, which felt like something. She couldn't have named what. The new shoot on the succulent was pale and slightly translucent, a thing that had happened without anyone deciding it should. She noticed it and said nothing, and it was the least frightening thing in the room. I need a break.
I wanted to ask if you are up to a chat actually about writing processes, and I mean, I don't know how much time we have.
10 minutes.
Perfect. 10, 40, 10, perfect for my little structural and formalist neurosis. This is very nicely structured. And it always kind of, yeah. I think it's really interesting, and this is not the first project in which I've been in which I've not talked to the other people. I've been doing the project before the project kind of happened, or like the reading or performative moment happened, that it kind of developed very organically when the performance happened. So much happenings. But I think it's really interesting how your mirror-like structure very much at the beginning, and this sort of, I mean, we talked about this a bit before, but how this sort of like dissolute, ghostly presence of the self and also of the author and also of the character kind of like entangle with one another. And I very much relate to this idea of abstracting oneself when writing fiction, because I've also, I think, never been able to write fiction from this sort of confessional place, but felt at most at ease, funnily enough, when I was writing fan fiction, and I was writing as a like postscript for a canonical whatever construction, basically. So you basically kind of get like those little characters, and you imagine their lives developing, and there are some characters that you kind of like relate to, so you kind of can put your own self into them without being your own self. So you kind of like construct this facade, and I think it's like a really interesting process that you're going through, I'm going through, and I think it's most probably banal for everyone who's ever written anything, but we do come from the fine arts more or less, or like from the more like critical and theoretical side of them. So it's very funny to be humbled by your laptop and your screen, your empty screen, the dreaded empty screen. I guess this was just like an introduction to maybe a chat that we could have, because also for me, when Helena wrote me, if you want to do this together, it was also very meta to what I've read from the Cooper text, that I've been trying to write a script, which is a semi-requirement, because you asked me to do this, and I was like, yeah, fuck, I've been actually meaning to write like an actual proper essay about twinks and twinkification and this figure of like a sort of feminized masculinity, on which I'm also writing a PhD on, but this is really serious, important stuff. So I don't want to mingle them, but they mingle anyway. And I fully failed to write that essay. I had like this sort of all ideas kind of working with Tikkun and with the theory of the young girl, and me being angry at the theory of the young girl and this construction of the young girl, and reading it thinking, this could also very much be about the twink and what is the difference. And then I finished the Dennis Cooper, George Miles cycle, and I was like, oh, he's just like, I mean, of course, this is all like dedicated to this George Miles muse. That was a person he knew and kind of abstracted in this figure, and is like this ghostly presence that follows through the books more structurally actually than character-wise. And it all felt obsessively connected. And then when I kind of started to do it, I was like, oh, this is too confessional. Oh, this is very embodied. So when you were reading your part about like the gallery show and the art is very subjective, very confessional, and it's so brave, I had to laugh like really hard, because this is very exact moment in which you're feeling, how do I abstract myself? How do I confess without confessing? How do I pseudo-confess? And I think this is a very interesting point in which we kind of, connected. I mean, I've been hiding behind quotes all the time, and I think this was, for a while, the last quote project. We're burying the quote for a while. But I'm happy I got to do it on radio, actually, because it makes so much sense to remix not music but text. I'm going to hand over to you. This was just rambling that I feel that I had to get out before and after the text, because it felt like very explanatory without wanting to be explanatory. But go ahead, I'm just embodying the podcast persona. I could do this for hours.
We should do a podcast together. I think it's really important and nice that you said like fandom and that kind of approach to material or to like characters that sort of like live with you in a very like abstracted parasocial kind of way. And I think it's also like, I mean, I would imagine it's kind of a generational thing. That's why I also, I mean, I'm so interested in like kind of social media and these like obsessive one-way kind of relationships that we have. But I mean, I also have them with, like Gloria, who I like write to, and it doesn't even really matter like in a way that she will receive it, because I mean, she can't, but also she kind of fulfills a function for me in a way that I can like abstract into a certain direction or like channel or something like that. But really just parts of myself. It's a very like narcissistic kind of exercise in a way.
But it's also a sort of like the fiction before the fiction in a way, because I think we've talked about this in autumn at some point, but I was doing basically the same, and I think there's also like this trick. I was writing letters to Katie Acker when I was like really angry. So and I think I wanted to kind of add in also like the kind of this like budding like romance also across like cultural divide, but also in the art scene into that, because there you also, I mean, when you fall in love, it's like always this kind of like play of projections, and the more kind of complicated sort of hierarchy or like illegibility or like kind of predestined paths based on identity or performance or whatever there are, like it just becomes like more intense, like this kind of
I guess like parasociality in the like lived social environment. And yeah, I wanted to kind of work it through by making these characters. And that's also sort of the tragedy of the art world in a way, no? Like, I mean, people love the confessional register. It's kind of also like what we're trained to do in a way. Like, it's something that has worked for a really long time, that has been like so present in art, especially if you want to kind of move across different contexts and be easily legible and sort of like smooth, or like smoothly and irritant, I don't know, like in a way that people can make money off of. I don't know where I'm going, but yeah, it's kind of like it's a strange thing to but I think the humbling thing has been like letting go in a way of like these worlds and like these kind of potential projects that are like in my head, and trying to like actually push it into something so that it can live. And like, you know, I also have this attachment to that like interior fake relationship that I build to like potential projects, and kind of trying to get out of it. But even also, I mean, also like gathering materials and assembling them together gives them like a new life completely.
Yeah, completely, sure.
And I think what's been interesting, I mean, I've been to a couple readings that you've done, and actually, quite frankly, and I mean, I have to confess this because, I mean, I hope this doesn't like say anything about our friendship, but I didn't know in the beginning that it wasn't your material.
Yeah.
Like, it's just completely still yours, because if you're like a very voracious reader of like everything, then it's also like you're like hungry for that, like you're digesting it. It's like part of you.
And it becomes part. I think this was also this sort of idea with the Dennis Cooper Twink text I've done today. Basically, it was this idea of this sort of like projection and construction of masculinity, which was always very important to me, but at the same time, the way in which gay culture kind of like doesn't let ambiguity sort of like happen, doesn't do anything for me, which is a quote by Acker from the letters with from I'm Very Into You. Yeah, exactly. And it's exactly the sort of feeling like, how do I sort of like construct this masculine figure that is always kind of like in there whispering in my ear, but it's not me, but it's also me. And I realized that the twink, it's the T is the quote, and the quote is always actualized in writing. And when I've done this reading at Prosopopea with the release of the Contemporary Magazine, where I wrote like a script basically about like with gathered material from fan fiction and a lot of Katie Ecker writing about like writing and proper writing and what is proper writing, I've read not the script but some rest material from the fan fictions I've gathered basically, and people were coming to me being like, oh my god, that was such a great text, and I was like, this is fan fiction. There is really good fan fiction out there. But it's really interesting kind of like questioning this, but at the very same time with quoting and like automated writing and like reproduction and like collaging, at some point I got like really tired of like kind of like producing this artistic persona and being like, yeah, I am denying authorship. I am questioning authorship. Everyone's questioning authorship, and it's having a really good coffee grinder. You know, like this sort of but it's and this is why we've been writing yesterday, and I was thinking when I was writing this or like collecting this basically. Yeah, of course, blah blah. It does get a new life. Like, why should it be different in text than it is like in a collage on the wall basically? That's just like, fine, it's a collage, yeah, sure, but the text is like not your text, and why should I not do the trick all the time? But it feels self-sufficient and masturbatory, but at the very same time the masturbation is also like the very like narcissistic masturbation is like the very interesting moment of it. That's why when I was reading the Cooper passages and also like the very last line of the text I've read, I'm just like here jerking off, one hand is jerking off, one is writing. You know, I think it's really interesting, but it's really funny, and I'm kind of like happy in a way that you're saying like, I've thought this is your text, and I was like, how is it and isn't it my text? I've been gorging in it since whenever, and I have like this I have like a specific register of like writers that when I'm reading, I'm like, I am this person, I am these characters, I am in this world, I am inside, I want them. And I think it kind of started with Chuck Palahniuk when I was a teenager, and I was reading a lot from him, and I think he influenced a lot of my writing and this sort of like taste actually. And I see myself more as an editor than like a writer or whatever that means. And I know that my talents are sort of in there, and that's why I always sort of like go back to that. But it kind of started with Palahniuk, and then Ecker was like a very important moment to me, and I was like, oh, the cut-up and the collage has been a canonical thing for a while, but I'm an art historian, not a literature scholar, so I forgot about that, or like never knew. And then I got to Cooper, and I got to Cooper through a reading, which is like really, like the Ouroboros is like eating its tail. Like someone read that to me, and I was like, holy shit, what was that? And he was like, yeah, it's like a chapter of Frisk. And I was like, whoa. And then I bought all the George Miles cycle, and I read it 1 year after I read Ecker, also like in the time in which I was struggling a bit in the art world. And I was like, thank you for writing about all this sex and violence that I love. Oh no. She is hot. Yeah, but I think this was the mic drop. I think this was like the very, very great mic drop. Unless you want to add something.
I would like to end with, I would like to say one last thing that really, I mean, it's just an anecdote from like a couple of days ago. I met up with my favorite ex-boyfriend, and he's my emotional support ex, and we were kind of talking about this thing of like separation, or like holding information in your body kind of neurotically or not, and like this like also letting go of the illusion that we can even like step outside of ourselves, because I've been going to therapy, and it's like Lacanian, and she's always all about like the cut, which is also like this editing function. But what kind of has been emerging for me is that often like these obsessive like accumulations that we make also have to do with like, they're often for me like neurosis driven. Like I want to kind of like consume everything, and like I want to see everything, and I want to like be informed. I want to monitor every situation in possible, out of a fear of like out of fear of them. But I've kind of learned that those copes, like those, I used to think like we have to step outside of those and kind of be like, oh no, like that's not good, that's not a process, that's not a creative source, that's not me, that's just my cope. But yeah, I was talking with my ex, and we were saying kind of like, well, but we kind of we are a sum of our copes. Like at some point, the fortress that you've kind of built to protect yourself from whatever is the house. So like it is the thing, and I want to start like actually like being proud of the house, and like, yeah, that's it. Like there's no need to do any more. We're doing it.